Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving deep into something pretty interesting, how people see honesty in politics.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of tricky, right?
Definitely.
Especially when we're looking at guys like Donald Trump and Joe Biden. It's like, how does this whole honesty thing play out with them?
Totally.
It seems like it's different for each of them.
Yeah, it is.
So, we've got this study guide called Evaluating Honesty in Political Discourse.
Right.
And it really digs into how you could actually argue that one candidate is more honest than the other, even if what they're saying is, well, really different.
Yeah, that's the interesting part, right?
Yeah. So before we even jump into those arguments, let's just talk about the word honesty.
Okay.
What's it even mean in politics?
Right.
Is it just about telling the truth?
Well,
Because I feel like it's got to be more complicated than that.
you're right. It's definitely not as simple as just, fact-checking everything. It's more than that. It's like when we say a politician is honest, we might be thinking about, did they tell the truth? Did they really mean what they said?
Yeah.
And did they say it in a way that just felt straight up,
Right.
The funny thing is those three things, they don't always line up,
That's true.
They don't always go together.
Yeah. It's a bit of a puzzle. So, okay. How would our source material argue that Donald Trump is the more honest one?
Well, the source kind of suggests that one way you could argue for Trump's honesty is to just focus on how direct he is.
Okay. Yeah.
He's known for just saying what's on his mind, no filter. And that seems refreshing to some people. It's authentic, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's almost like he's too honest to be a politician.
Right.
So the source says, using words like straight shooter or telling it like it is, those really hit home for people who are tired of all the, polished political talk.
Yeah, I can see how that would work for some voters for sure. But what about the times when, Trump's statements aren't totally accurate?
Yeah.
How would the source handle that?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The source kind of hints that you could defend Trump by saying those inaccuracies, well, they weren't intentional,
Okay.
Maybe he got caught up in the moment or his blunt style just, causes misunderstanding.
Right.
It's like they're saying he's so focused on being honest that he doesn't sweat the details, even if those details are facts.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got this image of Trump as, the guy who speaks his mind even if he's not always perfect on the facts.
Yeah.
So how would this same source then portray Joe Biden to support that claim?
Okay, so this is where the contrast comes in.
Yeah.
Instead of that directness, the source might say that Biden is very calculated,
Oh.
How he speaks, every word is chosen carefully.
Okay.
Maybe for political strategy, not from the heart. So it's they're suggesting he's playing the game, maybe even being a little deceptive.
So instead of straight shooter, what kind of words would they use for Biden?
I'm thinking words like deceptive or establishment would fit.
Yeah.
They paint a picture of him as part of the system, more worried about how things look than being truly honest.
That's a really good point. It's the same thing. Being careful with what you say can look totally different depending on how it's presented.
Exactly. That's where rhetoric comes in. The source talks about this in its glossary, and I think it's really important for how we see honesty in politics.
Okay, so when we say rhetoric,
Right.
we're talking about more than just the words, right? It's the whole package, right?
You got it. It's the how of communication, the art of persuasion, right?
Okay.
It's not just the words themselves, but your tone, your body language, even the pacing of what you're saying, all that can have a huge impact on how your audience feels about what you're saying and whether they believe you're being sincere.
So the same sentence, said two different ways, could sound honest or totally fake.
Exactly.
Cool.
Think about it. A politician says, I truly understand the challenges facing working families. If they say it with real emotion, connecting with people's struggles, it might seem sincere.
Right.
But if they say it with a bored expression or they're rushing through it, it'll probably feel phony.
That's a great example.
Right.
It really shows how much more is going on than just the words themselves.
We're not just robots processing information. We're emotional creatures. And that plays a huge role in how we judge someone's honesty.
That makes me think of something else the source brought up.
Okay, yeah.
The difference between factual accuracy
Yeah.
and how sincere someone seems. Because sometimes those things don't match up at all.
That's a big one.
Right.
Sometimes a speaker can have all the facts right, but come across as cold or distant.
Right.
Or they might be super passionate, even if some details are off. And we're often drawn to the person who feels honest, even if we're not sure about what they're saying. It's true. It's we've all been there. Right.
Yeah.
swept up in someone's passion, even if you're not sure all the facts are straight.
Right.
It's that feeling, like you believe them. That's powerful stuff.
I know I've fallen for that a few times myself, for sure. It makes you realize just how complicated this whole honesty thing really is. It's not just about fact-checking.
Yeah.
It's about all these emotions and perceptions getting mixed in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes you think, if sounding honest is so important, do politicians even need to be honest? Like, is it enough to just convince people? Our source actually talks about this. It even suggests that this idea of perceived honesty, well, it can be a really powerful tool, especially when you're targeting certain groups of voters.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about convincing everyone that a candidate is honest.
Yeah.
It's about tailoring that message for specific people.
Exactly. The source uses Trump as an example. Like, his supporters, they value his promises, and the fact that he's not a typical politician.
Yeah.
They're more likely to see his blunt style as authentic, even if some things he says are iffy on the facts.
Okay.
It's not just about each statement being true, it's about the whole message, and if it fits with their values,
So for those voters, Trump's directness reinforces their belief that he keeps his word.
Core.
Like, he's not afraid to say what he thinks, even if it ruffles some feathers.
Right, exactly. And that connection can be strong, especially for people who are disillusioned with the whole political establishment thing. On the other side, the source suggests Biden's perceived honesty might click with a different group.
You mean voters who might be turned off by Trump? Like they see him as too unpredictable or even reckless.
That's it. Those voters might like Biden's carefulness. They see it as responsible, a sign of experience.
Yeah.
They like that he thinks before he speaks, considers the impact. It could be seen as respect, for the office, for the voters.
So for them, Biden being measured feels trustworthy, even if it doesn't have that, in-your-face quality that Trump's people like. It's fascinating how the same thing, being careful with words, can be good or bad, depending on who's listening.
Yeah, it shows how much our perception of honesty is subjective. It's shaped by our beliefs and which way we lean politically. And that leads us to another big idea from the source. Bias.
Bias. It feels like we can't talk about politics without talking about bias, right? But how does it connect to how we judge honesty?
Well, the source says we all have biases.
Right.
And these biases, they can mess with how we understand information, even when we're trying to be objective.
Okay.
It's like our opinions are filters coloring how we see things, especially in politics.
So if someone already likes Trump, they might be more likely to see his bluntness as honesty, even if he bends the truth a bit. And if someone dislikes him, those same statements are proof he's lying no matter what.
You got it. Our biases can make it hard to see things clearly, especially with something as subjective as honesty. And it's the same with Biden. Someone who doesn't trust career politicians might see his carefulness as suspicious, like he's hiding something.
Right.
But someone who values experience and diplomacy might see that same carefulness as wisdom, being cautious. It all depends on how you're looking at it.
It's like we're all wearing these tinted glasses that change how we see reality, especially in politics.
Yeah.
And that makes it hard to talk about honesty because we're all coming from such different places.
You're right, it is. That's why it's important to know our own biases, to try and see things from different sides. It's not about being totally neutral, that's impossible, but it's about knowing that our beliefs can change how we understand things. The source really pushes this. It wants us to be critical, to question what we hear, and to consider other viewpoints.
It's like we need to be skeptical not just about the politicians, but about our own reactions to them.
Exactly. It's about knowing we can be swayed by rhetoric, emotions, how information is packaged. And once we get that, we can look deeper and make better judgments.
So it's not about being cynical and not trusting anything, but understanding how political language works, how it's used to convince us, and how our own biases fit into that.
That's exactly it. It's about being more aware, more discerning, and in the end, more empowered to deal with all the political talk.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. It's amazing how much we've learned about this simple idea of honesty in politics.
Yeah.
Turns out there's a lot more to it than we think at first.
It has been a fascinating exploration. We've seen how rhetoric, perception, and even our own biases all play a role in how we judge a candidate's honesty.
Right.
It's not just about checking facts, it's about the whole picture, the nuances, the strategies they're using.
So what does all this mean for us going forward? As we keep engaging with politics, what's the main takeaway?
I think the most important thing is to remember that honesty in politics is rarely clear-cut. It's complex, open to interpretation, and often used to get what they want politically. That means we need to be active, not just passive.
We can't just take things at face value. We need to think critically, question what we hear, consider different perspectives, and make our own judgments based on a deeper understanding of what's going on.
Exactly. It's about being more informed, more engaged, and in the end, more empowered to shape the world we want to live in.
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into honesty in politics, what's one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this conversation?
I think the biggest thing is to remember that honesty has many sides.
Okay.
It's about so much more than just whether someone's telling the truth. It's about their intentions, their sincerity, how they use language to convince us and connect with us. And it's about us, too, our perceptions, our biases, and how those shape our understanding of what we're hearing.
It's about looking deeper, asking questions, and thinking for ourselves.
Exactly. Don't just accept what you hear. Dig deeper, ask questions, and challenge the stories you're being told.
It's like, we've given you the toolkit, now you got to use it. And hey, we really want to hear what you think about all this.
Yeah.
Have you ever, questioned a politician's honesty, even if you couldn't say exactly why?
Yeah.
What made you feel that way?
Share your stories, your thoughts, even if you disagree.
Right.
A healthy democracy needs people who are informed, engaged, willing to think critically and challenge things.
It's true. Just blindly accepting what we hear, no questions asked, doesn't help anyone. And that's really what this whole deep dive has been about. Giving ourselves the power to be better listeners, to think more carefully about politics.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that honesty in politics, it's slippery.
It really is.
Rhetoric, perception, even our own biases, they all play a part.
Right.
Once we understand that, we can look at things with a more critical eye.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into honesty in politics, I want to leave you with this.
Yeah.
The next time you're listening to a speech, watching a debate, or even reading a news article, just take a second. Pause and ask yourself, what's the message? How are they using language to convince me? And what are my own biases? How are those shaping how I see things?
Those are great questions to ask. When we start asking those questions, we become more than just passive observers.
Right.
We become active in the search for truth.
We could all use a bit more of that these days. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.